Pretty much the only times in my life that I look back upon and I'm genuinely regretful of is when I've been in situationships.
The 3-month situationship that could have been so much more, and every motherfucker I know has had at least one of these.
Who the fuck invented situationships? Because you're a fucking dog.
Situationships are strange because they can feel deeply real and deeply unstable at the same time. They can involve daily contact, emotional intimacy, and shared routines without any shared understanding of where things are going. When they end, the loss can feel real, but it often feels difficult to justify. There's no label, no clear reason, and no socially accepted way to grieve it. Situationships are usually framed as a failure of modern dating, as proof that people today are avoidant, uncommitted, or emotionally unavailable. But that framing misses a more important question. Why do so many people end up in them in the first place? Instead of reflecting a collapse in how people value relationships, situationships can be understood as an adaptation to the conditions of modern adulthood. The same conditions that make them attractive are also what make them emotionally difficult. Research on close relationships suggests that not knowing where you stand with someone increases stress and changes how interactions are experienced. A big source of this pain is mismatched expectations. One person might see it as exploration, while the other hopes it'll turn into something committed. Situationships don't hurt because they're undefined. They hurt because not knowing where things stand makes it harder to protect yourself emotionally. Developmental psychologist Jeffrey Arnett describes emerging adulthood as a stage spanning the late teens through the 20s. It's a period where people are still figuring out who they are, dealing with instability, and postponing long-term commitments. Many of the timelines that once structured adult life, like career stability, housing, and marriage, now arrive later or less predictably for many people. Data from the US Census Bureau shows that the median age of first marriage has risen steadily for decades, alongside longer periods of education and shifting economic conditions. At the same time, Western culture places a strong emphasis on individual autonomy. Intimacy is still valued, but so is independence through separate goals, careers, friendships, and identities. Traditional relationship models often come with expectations of merging lives that many people don't feel ready for or don't want. So situationships emerge as a compromise. They allow emotional closeness without requiring immediate life-level commitment. If we zoom out, this begins to look less like individual failure and more like structural pressure. Dating apps intensify these dynamics. In his book, The Paradox of Choice, psychologist Barry Schwartz draws on decades of research to argue that having too many options can increase anxiety and reduce satisfaction. When choice feels endless, people become more concerned with choosing wrong than choosing well. This helps explain modern dating rituals like the talking stage and the soft launch. People are trying to understand a connection before they name it because naming it too early can feel like a risk. It's tempting to reduce everything to attachment styles, but that explanation only goes so far. Attachment theory is often used to explain situationships by pointing to avoidant attachment. Early work by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth described this pattern as a tendency to keep emotional distance and rely less on others for comfort. In adult dating, this pattern can show up as a preference for slower escalation or greater emotional distance. At the same time, modern attachment research emphasizes that attachment patterns are shaped by context and experience, not fixed personality traits. Research by psychologist Samantha Joel and her colleagues shows that people with anxious attachment often want closeness and commitment, but insecurity and fear of rejection can make it harder to act on that desire. Situationships often persist not because one person avoids intimacy, but because two different attachment patterns can lock together, each responding to uncertainty in their own way. Situationships tend to function best when uncertainty is temporary and actively managed. They're more sustainable when emotional availability is mutually understood, boundaries are discussed rather than assumed, communication is consistent, and changes in feelings lead to conversation or resolution. Under these conditions, a situationship isn't a waiting room for something real, it is something real, just not traditional. Problems start when people avoid making a decision. When moving forward would mean either committing or ending things, no one says what needs to be said, and the situation drags on. Over time, that uncertainty can start to benefit one person more than the other. Public health data shows growing concern about loneliness and social isolation. In 2023, the US Surgeon General formally identified loneliness as a public health issue, pointing to weakened community ties and fewer non-romantic sources of emotional support. As friendships, neighborhoods, and extended families play a smaller role in daily life for many people, romantic relationships are increasingly expected to meet a wider range of emotional needs. When a situationship doesn't turn into commitment, it can feel like a personal failure, even when it reflects broader social conditions. At the same time, past relationship models are often romanticized. In her book, The Way We Never Were, historian Stephanie Kuntz shows that what's remembered as the stable, mid-20th century family depended heavily on limited options. Many marriages lasted because leaving was socially, legally, or economically unrealistic, not necessarily because the relationships were healthy or freely chosen. Situationships aren't proof of a moral decline, and they're not evidence that modern dating is broken. They're not inherently fulfilling, and they're not inherently toxic. They're a transitional form of intimacy emerging at a time when people are expected to build close relationships before their financial stability, living situations, and long-term plans are fully in place. Situationships don't become harmful because they lack labels. They become harmful when things stay unclear long after people already know what they need.